but it's not working because of legislative failure. That 2018 year, the way that it was set up with that board, and if we're going to blame them for most of it, 800 applications in the queue that they'd never gotten to. And I agree that now that Lara, that shows up every day and they're at their office and they're turning around and returning calls, and that's all humming now. And I think a lot of people that are knowing about the licensing work will attest to that. But it goes to really where we are politically. Our current administration, voted in the context of legalization, a mandate, so to speak, of how to, effectuate marijuana policy in Michigan. She's used her executive authority to do that. She, today, passed, signed into law legislation. But do you have I know this is something that maybe, you were in favor of at the time, but the concept of the caregiver remaining in the system, just to kind of equalize that marketplace and avoid that, the prohibition that kind of always, takes away from a regulated system. Does it surprise you that we're here now? As I describe it, the pointing out of I'm calling the caregivers heroes right now. They're the ones that are supplying the market, right? But for them, there wouldn't be any. And 2 years ago, their number was cooked, kind of. It was anticipated they were going to be trying to legislate them up. Do you see that as, in terms of, where the caregivers stand right now, just, remarkable at all, or not unremarkable, in terms of where, where they're positioned, and what their likelihood of survival may be moving forward?
Oh, I'm not sure I'm prepared to handicap their likelihood of survival. I think that's going to be dependent a lot on those of us in this room and across the state, and whether or not we're willing to speak out to our legislators and say something along the lines of what you just said, which is that these caregivers are individuals who stuck their neck out, took a lot of risk, in many cases to help people who were desperate and sick and needed help. And they shouldn't be looked at as criminals or scofflaws. They should be looked at as community members who are trying to do the best for their neighbors and for their families. And so we need to make sure that frame is clear for all of our legislators. And we need to keep fighting to get caregivers back in the system. Back when we passed the MMFLA, that was one of the main things I was fighting for down the stretch, was we need to create an avenue for these folks to get into the market. And if we don't, it's going to create horrible problems for the whole system, and for the licensees and for the caregivers as well. And we don't want that. Let's have an orderly system. It's one of the reasons why in Proposal 1 we included that smallest grow license,
yes,
hoping that was going to be a door that caregivers could come into the legal market and sort of solve this weird position that we put the caregivers in, which really all resulted because when the MMFLA was being debated, the Michigan State Police and others really the Sheriff's Association, the chiefs of police, the prosecuting attorneys, they wanted to amend the MMMA to eliminate caregivers. That was their goal.
Right.
And they were unable to accomplish that goal because even though they had a majority in the legislature and in the governor's office, they didn't have a 3/4 majority. And so we were able to stop that, but as a result, we got this broken system,
right,
which was the only sort of compromise that could get across the line at that time.
But currently the caregivers are operating within this regulated licensed system. Caregivers are selling their overages to licensed facilities. In fact, I have a client I won't say where, but they got a call from where I was saying you should buy up as much as you can right now from the caregivers, because the March 31st date previously was going to be a deadline that you could no longer buy from caregivers. You have to test, and you have to buy from the market, and the price difference was outrageous. So Lara and
shittier quality and
worse quality, right? But they're buying from one person instead of getting it through 3 or 4 people, and the price, So it's interesting, but that's what's been making this system work all of 2018. That's the total source of the supplies. You know what I mean?
But it's been working in fits and starts, and I think what the licensees do deserve, to get back to your question, Jim, and what the caregivers deserve, and what consumers deserve, and what the public here in Michigan deserves, is an orderly, consistent, reasonable system. Yep. And when you have a system where you're saying you're going to get cut off on this day, and then, oh, no, you're not, TRO, and does that get extended or does it not? It puts everybody in this position of uncertainty and chaos, which is not helpful across the board. And so, that's what I think needs to be solved. We need to create a reasonable door for suppliers to get into the legal market, and give everybody some certainty and some consistency, so that folks aren't constantly asking, is what I'm doing legal? Is what I'm doing going to affect my future business plans? It's just, that whole uncertainty is a problem across the board.
Let me say, this is also legislative big news today. The governor, his announcement, they are no longer requiring for the pilot program of the industrial hemp program from 2014, and it still exists, no requirement for a university. In other words, I've been to 4 events. Rick's event, where's Rick? They were like hostile. Remember, they're like, where can we grow? I'm growing anyway. Screw them. Like a really loud
Michigan Cannabis Business Development Seminar.
So, and they were like, and we were talked then. And we were going to petition the governor, which we did. And what do you know? You ask and they shall receive. So it was a huge move, right? Huge, and people are excited. The play out of what is going to be defined by a pilot project can be is obviously the things that we're going to be learning about. But do you have any thoughts or comments on that? I mean, obviously, there's a lot of excitement in Michigan. I'm sure you've felt it from your constituents of wanting to get going, a lot of farmland, and other states have pilot projects that are much more open to trading and transferring and selling in a commercial manner, even though it's pilot with the state. But just give your thoughts on that. It's a kind of exciting day for the Michigan hemp farmers. I know that.
So my opinion on this is that it's a huge opportunity for the state of Michigan, and I know for a fact that there was a lot of us in Lansing and a lot of folks otherwise around the state who were advocating for the governor to do something so that we wouldn't miss this season. It would be a disaster for the state of Michigan economically and otherwise if other states raced ahead getting hemp in the ground this year and we failed to do so. That would have been bad for our future opportunities economically around industrial hemp. Not being an expert on the subject, it seems to me that Michigan's very well positioned to catch the wind on some of the growth in the CBD market and some of the other uses out there. But given Michigan's success with fruit crops and stuff like that, it seems like Michigan might be a great place to produce high yield plants for the CBD purposes. So I'm excited about it. I think it's a huge opportunity. I certainly was advocating that the department and the governor take this move, and I was super excited when I saw that press release today because I've got a bag of hemp hearts in my office that I brandish every once in a while, and it really bothers me that when you look on that bag, at the top of the bag it says Manitoba Harvest. That should be Michigan Harvest.
Sure, absolutely.
We should be able to buy Michigan products in Michigan, and the fact that we can't because of some uptight, weird connection between that and some other bad laws around cannabis it's criminal, it's foolish.
So, hey, before we take a break, is there any discussion or have you heard anything about the governor possibly using some executive powers to do anything about pardoning people or
so
not waiting? I'm sorry.
No, there's been a lot of talk about that. I'm not in a position to understand what's being discussed in the inner circle behind the scenes, but I do know that from how I understand the law, there is a lot that the legislature should be doing immediately on these issues that would provide better relief to a greater number of citizens than what the governor could easily do. And so on that score, I'm really excited that we're working on a bunch of issues around expungement and around exoneration of criminal records. And so there are a few different pieces to this. One is that I've been working on some legislation, bipartisan legislation with Senator Santana is really taking the lead, and Senator Vanderwall. We just introduced some bills that will release people from either confinement or more so supervision and probation.
Yeah.
And so if someone has been arrested for a cannabis crime, it's now legal. They shouldn't be on probation anymore. They shouldn't have to deal with that, and we shouldn't be paying a probation officer to find out where they are on any given day. It's just foolish. And so we're trying to get those people out of the system immediately, and that is a priority that we need to get done in a timely way to actually matter to the people who are negatively affected by the nonsense that they're experiencing. Now, the other piece of it is going after the set-aside of the records. Right? And there's a lot of interesting bipartisan energy behind this. There's a whole lot of energy behind a policy called Clean Slate, which would be automatic expungement for any crime over 10 years old if you haven't had any new ones. That's a good one, but we're also pushing broadening the rules around expungement, giving folks the opportunity. Right now in Michigan, you can only expunge 2 misdemeanors. That's nonsense. You should be able to expunge multiple misdemeanors. I think there's broad agreement that you should also be able to expunge multiple felonies if they arrive from the same event. And then there are some of us who are trying to push that even further. But then there's the piece of it that's maybe closer to the heart of the folks in this room, which is that there's another group of bills that are being worked on around what I would call expungement for petty issues. And so that would be a class of traffic fines. There's a whole lot of folks who have, traffic offenses that
are considered misdemeanors, like traffic misdemeanors.
Traffic misdemeanors. Thank you, Michael. That shouldn't be on their record and that we should get expunged. And so that's a piece of it. And then the other piece of it is cannabis. And so what I'd like to see is automatic set aside of all cannabis records. Period. Without folks having to hire an attorney, without folks having to go to court. I don't think folks should have to pay more to access the rights and liberties that they should already be afforded to. So that's what I'm pushing for. And there is pushback from some elements of law enforcement. Some elements of law enforcement will say, well, what if they had a semi-truck, or what if this, or what if that, or what if violence was involved, or what if there's another offense, And so that's what we're working through right now, is trying to, put forward a bill that's going to be, great for Michigan citizens, give a lot of folks a second chance, be able to access a lot of, rights that they haven't been able to in the past. But we got to get it passed as well.
I was going to say, in the 26 years I've been practicing law, the first 20 went by, and the expungement law was what it was. It did not change. There was you'd have one misdemeanor as your prior. And if you had, you could then get another then if you had two misdemeanors, one misdemeanor, one could be removed. Then it changed, and then they started including, because it's traffic misdemeanors. If you had two of those people get a driving while license suspended, it's like that could be a preclusion. So,
yep.
But it's expanded 3 or 4 or 5 times in just the last 5 years to the defendant's favor, in that you can now have a felony and a misdemeanor get the felony expunged. That's occurred. And 2 misdemeanors and 1 felony you get right. So it's expanded, which is phenomenal. So it must catch some legislators must like that for some, because I haven't seen that kind of amendatory stuff happen. But this is good. This is all good talking, especially with the marijuana. But go ahead. If we're gonna,
I'd be shooting for a 7-to-1 ratio.
We're gonna have to.
Hold on, I'm not done. I have one other comment.
No problem.
The idea here that we are living in a world of legalization, right, which is really the point you're making. I still go to courts and they're treating it like nothing ever happened. I'm like, what's going on here? Like, I got clients that were, that they were put on probation for 3 years for some felony. This is not me. I've heard some of David's clients. I don't know clients of mine are felony probation. But David may have a client who's been pled to a felony, put on probation for 3 years. That started in 2018, 2017. Now it's 2019. They've been on probation for a year and a half, and they're going to remain for another year and a half for a felony, which is now should be treated as a civil infraction, right? It's disproportionate. There was a time in the world in Michigan when there was a similar circumstance, and this is the best argument, I think, and no court is accepting this, but this is the basic principle. The old mandatory minimums for the cocaine laws, over 225, less than 650, mandatory 10, right? If you got convicted of it, mandatory 10, judge couldn't do anything. Come up for sentencing, mandatory 10. Then they changed the law that mandatory 5. Courts had discretion to go up or down from that. But there was all these people that had been arrested and convicted by trial and then came up for sentencing when the new law was in effect. Convicted and culpable date when the law was mandatory 10, come up for sentencing when the law is mandatory 5. What is a judge to do was the question. In the law of the land by the Michigan Supreme Court in the Schultz and Sands case, they combined the two of them, was that the defendant should receive the punishment intended by the legislature at the time of the sentencing, absent some savings clause, which would have been something like anyone that had been convicted of this crime who was going to get sentenced and may get the benefit of this new law doesn't get the benefit. Like some claim, proclamation with the law of someone, that's a savings clause. So that's how the courts have resolved this with the legislative, new laws in terms of punishment. So as we stand here today, if someone's to get sentenced today, a sentence from all these so-called crimes would be civil infractions, right? It's a civil infraction. It's legal. It's supposed to be legal, not probationable. Legal.
Right.
And, all these, this should be a legal remedy. Like the law exists for this. It's crazy that we have to have a legislative enactment to take place. Courts are not, they're the institution itself, don't get me started, I know we're taking a break, but from day one, they never created a medical marijuana exception. The probationers, none of this. It's just they've been, chewing people up and spitting them out. And anyway, Go ahead.
We're celebrating today.
Yes, we are. That's right.
So,
This is how we do it. This is my best way of celebrating.
So we want to get a lot. There are a lot of. We want to get back to John and Adam. There's a lot of people that want to come through and give you their congratulations on this. So let's take a break and get people through here.
Very good. All right. We'll be right back.
Taking a break.